advancement of archaeology. So as a member of the Chicago Archaeological Society, you also become a member of the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology. So you get our newsletter and you get the Illinois Antiquity, which covers interesting archaeological events, findings in the state of Illinois. And there are chapters all over Illinois. So if you would like to learn more, if you'd like to join, please go to chicagoarchaeologicalsociety.com and select join. Thank you for our current members for your support, because you're the whole reason that we can exist and have great speakers and do the newsletter. Let me introduce our speaker today. Michael Ruggieri is Professor Emeritus from the Chicago Colleges of Chicago. He is a moderator of the largest and oldest Ancient America listserv on the World Wide Web, Astalan. He also moderates an Andean list and a mound builder list. Mike serves on the board of the Illinois Association for the Advancement of Archaeology and the board of Chicago Archaeological Society. He has taught courses on Mesoamerica, Mexican history, Latin American history, among other courses in his 33-year teaching career. He maintains over 50 different web pages on all aspects of ancient Americas. For the Archaeological Society, he contributes a regular column to our newsletter, the Codex, and has given many lectures to the Society on various topics of the ancient Americas. Today, Mr. Ruggieri will deliver a talk on trade between Mesoamerica and ancient Southwest in macaws, parrot feathers, copper bells, turquoise, turkeys, pottery, as well known for some time, but only recently have they become aware of a large-scale trade in cacao and chocolate between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest from the 9th century on. So please, everyone welcome Michael Ruggieri.
So Jim, do you want to talk about the next lecture now or after?
I'll do it right now since I have it on my side screen.
Okay.
But one of our participants tonight, Barbara McLeod, is on September 16th, and it would be 7 p.m. Central Time. She's going to be our Zoom presenter with a program titled A Cave for All Seasons, Agriculture and New Year's Rituals at Noctunich Cave, Petén, Guatemala. Barb grew up in Missouri and began exploring and mapping caves in her teens. From 71 to 75, she worked in the Belize Department of Archaeology as a Peace Corps speleologist, documenting extensive underground ritual sites from the Maya Classic period and rescuing artifacts in danger of theft by looters. She received her PhD in anthropology from the University of Texas at Austin in 1990. Barb, do you want to say hello to everybody? Or
because of your art.
well, I can't hear you. But,
okay, no, I'm up now. I just have to get the tech up and running. Here I am, and good evening to all.
Evening, Barb. All right. Tonight I'm going to talk about the Mesoamerican ancient Southwest chocolate trade. It's a fascinating subject because a lot of what I'm going to tell you tonight in terms of archaeological time is pretty recent. Archaeology and the way it moves forward, it often takes glacial speed for us to get from point A to point B. So we know all about a lot of the trade between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest, like scarlet macaws and copper bells and turquoise and things of that nature. But only recently have we begun to find out how extensive and how important the Mesoamerican ancient Southwest chocolate trade had been. And so what you're looking at here on the home screen is a lot of cylinder jars, thin, round, cylindric in shape, that we now know contain ancient chocolate. And when we see these cylinder jars at almost any site in Mesoamerica or in the Southwest, it's going to be pretty clear that these were chocolate containers. And so because of the distinctive shape of them, it's easier now for archaeologists to begin looking for chocolate because they just look for these cylinder jars, and then they begin testing for chocolate. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I'm letting people see right now. All right, now the idea of the trade between the ancient Southwest and Mesoamerica is now encapsulated in what we call Oasis America. And you're looking at a map of Oasis America, and you see up at the top in the northern part, which includes Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, two very large sites in the ancient Southwest, is the homeland of the ancestral Pueblo. It used to be called the Anasazi, but now they prefer to be called ancestral Pueblo. And then over to the left, the homeland of the Hohokam culture, and the Hohokam culture's largest site is at a site called Casa Grandes, which is in near Phoenix, Arizona. And then the one that goes deep down past the present-day U.S. border and into Mesoamerica are the Mogollon. And so we're going to learn a little bit about the Mogollon in terms of that influence in Mesoamerica and how it affected the other two great cultures of the ancient Southwest as we go forward with this lecture. But as you look at this map, you can see that one area, one culture like the Mogollon being right next to the other culture, and then that one being right next to the northern culture, that they would have a lot of influence on each other, both in terms of architecture, in terms of their religious ideas, in terms of their pottery, in terms of their rock art, for example, in terms of the kind of games they played and the kind of entertainment they had. So they built a synergistic system where it's easy to see from this map that the Mesoamerican influence upon the Mogollon would seep through to the north, up into the Hohokam region and the ancestral Pueblo region. So it becomes pretty much one big Mesoamerican ancient Southwest culture. In some areas more ancient Southwest, in other areas more Mesoamerican, but there's a blend of each of those cultures in all of these cultural areas. So it's a very interesting area of study, very fascinating area that a lot has not yet been explored. We've done a lot more exploration in Mesoamerica than we have done in the ancient Southwest. And so we're finding new things about this Oasis America every day. Now, in terms of what would become the chocolate trade between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest, this map tells you, admitting another person here, this map tells you the connection between all of the Mesoamerican cultural areas to the south and the connection to the Mogollon, ancestral Puebloan, and Hohokam southwestern areas to the north. And so when they began trading from Mesoamerica to the ancient Southwest, all of these places that you see on this map were producing items that would eventually make its way up to the ancient Southwest. And tonight's lecture topic is the trade of chocolate, cocoa beans from all these places to the south into the ancient Southwest area. And you can see that it's a very dynamic area. There's a lot of things going on in terms of trade between Mesoamerican areas and between Mesoamerican areas and the ancient Southwest. So it's a thriving, very large trade system that, again, we're beginning to find more and more about how large it was, the impact of it throughout all of the Americas as we learn more about this topic. Just wanted to show you a picture of, these are some cocoa pods on a tree in the Yucatan. You can see what they look like. They weigh a pound each about, and each chocolate pod here growing contains 25 to 60 seeds. So if they have enough chocolate pods, they can have enough seeds to spread around. They used it in Mesoamerica as currency. And for a beverage that they made, a liquid beverage, that they used at feasting rituals and important occasions, and sort of like the champagne of the ancient Americas, liquid chocolate coming from these pods. Now, in terms of the first Mesoamerican chocolate, it began with the mother culture of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs. And we found chocolate, liquid chocolate, at a site way down, way down here at a site called Paso de Amara on the Pacific coast. And at a certain point in time in the history of Paso de la Amara, they became very Olmecized, so that all of their statuary, their pottery, their beliefs, their rituals, and so on reflected what was happening in the Olmec heartland up here in the northern Gulf Coast. And some of the major cities of the Olmecs on the northern Gulf Coast, La Venta, San Lorenzo, Laguna de los Cerros, and Tres Zapotes, those are four main ones in the Olmec heartland. And they became colonizers, so that they spread their religion, their ideas, their rituals, and perhaps by way of conquest, they colonized in an imperialistic fashion other places to the south of them and to the west of them in Mesoamerica. And so we believe that this site down in the south, way down in the Pacific coast, Paso de la Amara, became an Olmec colony. And the reason we can say that is because all of the things that you find at a certain date at Paso de la Amara reflect almost everything that you see up here in the Olmec heartland in terms of design, in terms of ideas, in terms of art, and so on. And you see in the center there a figurine from Paso de la Amara, which is a ball player. And that kind of figurine is very, very Olmec. If you understand Olmec art, Olmec figurines, Olmec ideas, you would not recognize this as anything but Olmec. And here we find these kinds of figurines down in Paso de la Amara, the possible colony of the Olmecs far to the south. And at Paso de la Amara, they were making liquid chocolate because they're closer to chocolate beans there than they are further to the north in the Olmec heartland. And we also see on the left these Olmec vessels that were just studied recently at the site of San Lorenzo. And we found that they were drinking chocolate from these vessels at San Lorenzo at 1,800, 1,900 years ago. And so we're talking about, in terms of Mesoamerica, a practice of drinking chocolate, utilizing chocolate as a beverage, as a festival tool, as a ritual drink, way back to 1,900 BC, earliest liquid chocolate in Mesoamerica so far. And one of the interesting things that we found at San Lorenzo in terms of using chocolate as a festival treat is that at one time at San Lorenzo, they had a huge festival, and the main ingredient that they were drinking and imbibing at this ritual was chocolate from these vessels that we see in front of you. And they threw about 200 or so of these vessels over a pit that contained sacrificial victims. There were 25 sacrificial victims in that pit, and they had been disarticulated, cut into pieces. And so this was some kind of a sacrificial ritual. And the fact that they wanted to drive home that chocolate was an important part of this, they threw hundreds of chocolate vessels over the top of this grave, this mass pit of human sacrifices. And so it tells us something about, even as early as 1,900, 1,800 BC, chocolate is very, very important in terms of being used as a ritual, being used at great festivals, and being used for high religious purposes. We would not find chocolate vessels like this all the way up into the southwest until 750 AD. So it took about 1,600 years for chocolate, starting out in the Olmec heartland there, to reach the ancient Southwest. At first, we found it at a place called Chaco, and then we're going to talk about later another site called Alkali Ridge, way up in southeastern Utah. So 1,000 years, 1,600 years before the end of chocolate drinking in the Olmec heartland to the time they started drinking chocolate in the ancient Southwest. Now, I wanted to just look at a brief overview of what was traded between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest. You all know about the scarlet macaw feathers that were being traded to the north from way deep in Mesoamerica. Some 2,000 miles away, these scarlet macaws were brought by long distance walking trade all the way up into the great site in the ancient Southwest of Chaco. And so they were prized for their feathers, used on shields, used in headdresses, and used just for ceremonial purposes. So a lot of scarlet macaw trade going on between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest during this period of time. Right to the left of that, you see a photo of the great Chihuahua site of Paquimé. And at Paquimé, they may have either been a place where they transported macaws that they brought up from the south to the southwest, or they may have actually raised their own macaws at Paquimé. And so they were doing all kinds of things in terms of trade items with the ancient Southwest, bringing things from the deeper in Mesoamerica and then making some of their own items at Paquimé. And then on the right here, you see what were scarlet macaw pens at Paquimé. So they were these birds were either penned up here in cages, or they were being raised at this point at this site at Paquimé. Another item that was traded from Paquimé and then further south into the ancient Southwest were copper bells. Very important item in the Southwest. They used them for all kinds of ritual dances, jewelry, of course, elite wear. So the copper bell trade was big. And then right to the right of the copper bells, you see a pyrite mirror. And pyrite mirrors were created as far south as Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica, maybe further south, and traded up the line through Paquimé up into the ancient Southwest. Very valuable item in the ancient Southwest because there weren't that many of them. And as you can see from the picture on the right, the etchings of this either ball player or warrior you see here that would have been on one side of this pyrite mirror. And you can see why, because it was so shiny, they could look into it. In Mesoamerica, they would look into shiny objects like this to divine the future and to try to predict things that would happen for shamanism and religious rituals. And perhaps they were done in the same way in the Southwest. And then the all-important item that you see at the bottom and over to the right, second row, turquoise. And of course, that was the one item that the ancient Southwest folks could trade in relation to trade from Mesoamerica. So the Mesoamericans were very interested in the turquoise, and the ancient Southwest very interested in all those other items that I have just shown. Most of the turquoise in the Southwest comes from mines in New Mexico. We used to think that the Cerrillos mine in Mexico was the greatest place for chunking out turquoise and then fashioning it into jewelry, necklaces and so on, and then selling it to the Mesoamericans. But now we know that at that same time as the Cerrillos mine was being utilized, there were 72 other mines at the same time and place, well, not the same place, in New Mexico, where they were also chunking out turquoise to make the trade objects. So there's a lot of turquoise mines in New Mexico at 800, 900, 1000 AD. Now, I'm going to focus on a very important site in terms of this trade that's going on between Mesoamerica and the ancient Southwest. The capital of the Chaco culture in New Mexico, the beautiful site that you've all seen of Pueblo Bonito, whose years are from 850 to 1150 CE. And it is at this site that modern researchers first discovered that chocolate was being utilized in the ancient Southwest around 850 AD, about the same time as Pueblo Bonito was populated. They were drinking chocolate at Pueblo Bonito. Now, almost all the cylinder jars, maybe 95% of the cylinder jars at Pueblo Bonito that contained chocolate were in this one room, room 28, at Pueblo Bonito. There were some 200 jars here that were sitting on top when they excavated this, and a lot of them cylindrical in nature. And this drew the attention of archaeologists because they were beginning to understand that there must be some deep meaning behind the way in which these jars were shaped and formed. And of course, archaeologists understood that they knew what Maya jars looked like in the Maya region, and they were also long and slim and round and cylindrical. And so archaeologists began to wonder whether or not these same type of cylindrical jars that they found in room 28 were also used like the Maya used in those jars for making chocolate. So that's a very important room in terms of Chaco history and in terms of Pueblo Bonito history. Now, the archaeologists who discovered that they were making chocolate in those cylinder jars in room 28 at Pueblo Bonito, her name was Patricia Crown. And she was the one that was reminded of these Maya vessels that you find all across the Maya world, in which it had already been tested that these kinds of jars, these cylindrical jars, did contain chocolate as a beverage. So they chose this kind of motif, this kind of shape and design in order to make the chocolate and to drink it. So when Patricia Crown saw photos of room 28 and all these cylindrical jars that were scattered all over the place in that room, some broken, some still intact, she thought that she might be able to study these if she got the permission to do so in a very deep and detailed way. And so they gave her permission to dig a deep trench, archaeological style trench. And in this trench, she pulled out some 200,000 items, a massive catch of items from this one trench at Pueblo Bonito, a lot of them from room 28. And one of the people that helped her with understanding this whole concept was the curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and Smithsonian Institute. Her name is Dory Boudet. And she suggested to Patricia Crown, before Patricia Crown dug that trench, that she thought that those Maya vessels probably indicated, in terms of what was going on in Southwest Mesoamerican trade, that there was already a wide trade network and that you might find chocolate vessels like this at Chaco. And so Patricia Crown went to work and dug that trench, found 200,000 objects, and she found those cylinder vessels in room 28 at Pueblo Bonito. Now, in terms of the distance that chocolate has to come from in order to get to the ancient Southwest, we're talking a distance of 2,000 miles from Tabasco, from Chiapas, from Guatemala, from El Salvador. That's how far chocolate beans had to come to get to Pueblo Bonito. And remember, they don't have wheels, they don't have pack animals. So they have to walk 2,000 miles to get their chocolate beans for trade items to the ancient Southwest. Whether they actually walked 2,000 miles or they traded from hand to hand, we don't know. But there were obviously outposts, way stations in which this chocolate would be gathered and then move further north. And when Patricia Crow looked at the cylindrical jars at Pueblo Bonito, and here you're looking at some really nice photos. Photo on your left is the way they look when she dug them out. 200 of these vessels in room 28. You can see in the center picture a nicely intact chocolate vessel that she was able to dig out with rain symbols, with lightning symbols, probably representing fertility, and they're probably hooking chocolate to fertility in some way or another. And then over to the right at the top, you can see that photo that I showed you in my home screen. Some of the, she found 28 of these vessels totally intact, and a lot of them with these lightning, fertility, rain symbols drawn on them. And then against a red background, a very nice photo of other objects from Pueblo Bonito that also contain chocolate. Now, the cylindrical jars were the only ones that contained chocolate for a long time. And then at a certain time, as Chaco began to collapse, they started making cups like you see here and shallow bowls like you see on the right to hold chocolate. So something was happening here stylistically, maybe religiously, in which they started to branch out and put chocolate in different kinds of vessels. Now, in order to make sure that this was really chocolate and that this trade was extensive, Patricia Crown and her crew began to investigate jars all over the Chaco area. Went to a site called Los Muertos and found that 80% of the vessels there nearby contained chocolate. 65% of these Chaco cylinders that you're looking at contain chocolate. 41% of those pictures that you're looking at there in the bottom right contain Chaco, and 83% of the shallow bowls that they began making later from Chaco contain chocolate. And the biggest surprise was when they excavated areas where commoners lived, it turned out the commoners were also drinking chocolate from the same kinds of vessels. We thought that only the elite would have license to drink chocolate. It's so expensive in terms of how far it came and how little there had to be by the time it got to the Southwest. But it was so extensive and so widespread that even the commoners were drinking chocolate from these kinds of vessels. So that opened up a whole new avenue of exploration in terms of this chocolate trade and how it was working socially. It may be that they were using chocolate beans as currency, just like they did in Mesoamerica. So we may have commoners that are doing work for the elite, and the elite was trained selling, paying the commoners with chocolate beans, so they too could drink chocolate. Now, in terms of how they made the drink, they simply poured water, hot water, into these jars, mixed it around, and the main ingredient for chocolate in these jars is an ingredient called theobromine. Theobromine is a very sour tasting liquid. So in order to make it more palatable, they would have to put in, and they did, chilies or honey or vanilla so that it tasted better. And what kind of physiological symptoms would chocolate drinkers have after they imbibed this highly caffeinated chocolate liquid? Well, it got the heart pumping faster, so they were stimulated. It got the lungs opening up so they could breathe easier. And so they got a high out of it because of the high level of caffeine in these coffee beans and then mixed in with the water. And so before they sent warriors into battle, they would have them drink this liquid. And you can see why now, because it pumped them up for battle, made them more awake, made them their lungs working better, stimulated them so that they'd be better in battle. Now, we knew about the vessels at room 28 at Pueblo Bonito, and then we found out one at a time, as you just saw on the last slide, that there were many sites nearby and some further away, even in Arizona. Patricia Crown was looking at sites in Arizona, looking for chocolate in these same kind of vessels, and found just as much chocolate in those vessels all the way over in Arizona from New Mexico as she found at Chaco. And so we thought then 850 AD was the moment in time at Chaco, at Pueblo Bonito and room 28, that the practice of drinking chocolate first began in the ancient Southwest. But then came a huge surprise, a surprise so big that it's still a mystery to us today, and we're going to have to do a lot of research to figure out how this happened and why. But an archaeologist by the name of Dorothy Washburn was excavating at a site at Alkali Ridge in southeastern Utah, that far north. And she began to turn up these very unusual vessels, these pots that you see, that we call now abajo red on orange. And they look nothing like any of the pottery that existed anywhere near this site in earlier times. The regular pottery that you could find in this area of southeastern Utah was very heavy pottery, thick-walled pottery, very simple black on white or white on black design, kind of clunky. And then suddenly it turns up these very thin, very finely crafted, very light, very nicely and detailed decorated bowls, like you're looking at here in these photos. And Dorothy Washburn was wondering, well, what's happening here that suddenly there's this change in style, change in pottery design, change from clunky and heavy and thick walled to light and much more sophisticated suddenly overnight in archaeological terms. So before I go any further, this is the area around Alkali Ridge that you see on the left. So it's kind of a scrub desert area. And then here is a dwelling that Dorothy Washburn lived into at Alkali Ridge, and then the pottery that she found. And when she saw this, she decided that she better learn something about the history of this kind of very sophisticated and very light, very thin-walled pottery. So she took a study of some 18 vessels that were in a museum in Utah that they dug up in the 1930s, but nobody cared to try to figure out what was so unusual about these or why they were so different. And she found that 13 of those 18 vessels contained chocolate. And so here we have the big surprise, because this chocolate in these vessels dates to 750 AD. And remember, down at Chaco, 850, 900, maybe 950 AD was the date for the chocolate there. So the question is, how does chocolate turn up way far to the north in southeastern Utah, some 200 to 250 years earlier than chocolate at Chaco? How can this be? Because you would think if there was a regular trade route, you would see things going on between Chaco in terms of this kind of pottery beginning to show up and more chocolate showing up as you go north. But there isn't that kind of evidence. All we see is it's suddenly way far, say about 400 miles north in southeastern Utah at 750 CE. Suddenly there's chocolate, and suddenly there are these sophisticated, almost Mesoamerican style pottery. And so Dorothy Washburn now is the second person to have discovered chocolate in the Southwest, and she gets the distinction of discovering the first chocolate in the Southwest. But how is it that this is happening so far north from Chaco with nothing in between Chaco and Alkali Ridge that would indicate a steady progression of trade of chocolate and this kind of pottery further north? It's not there. It doesn't exist. So Dorothy Washburn came to the conclusion that these folks must be coming from Mesoamerica, because they knew what they were doing. Right away, we see the difference. They knew how to make this pottery, which the folks at Alkali Ridge and environs there did not know how to make. So we can make some guesses. Maybe they were actually Mesoamericans that came that far north, past Chaco for some reason, way past Chaco up to Utah, and started making chocolate there. Or maybe there was a kinship group, and that's what we're going to have to study. Perhaps a kinship group way earlier in Mesoamerican Southwestern times came up here and established a home, a site, and continued to have kinship with their home site somewhere in Mesoamerica, so that there was a steady flow of kin groups between this site in Utah and whatever site they came from in Mesoamerica. Those are the two guesses. Either Mesoamericans came and did this somehow bypassed Chaco by a lot, or a kinship group moving back and forth on one straight line. And that one straight line idea is not something so unusual in ancient Southwest Mesoamerican trade, if you know anything about Steve Lexon's Chaco Meridian concept, which is pretty fascinating. So there you have it, the great mystery that still has to be studied, still has to be understood, and we still don't have any idea how this could have occurred and why it occurred so far north with no intermediate sites between Chaco and the abrupt transition in pottery from simple and clunky to sophisticated in almost Mesoamerica. I'm having you take a look at the area around Alkali Ridge. You can see Alkali Ridge right here. Whoops. You can see darn it. It's very, very sensitive. You can see Alkali Ridge right here. And since this discovery by Dorothy Washburn of Alkali, and it's a nice thing that we're talking about all women archaeologists here, aren't we? So that's a breakthrough in and of itself in terms of these kind of discoveries, and it's a good thing for archaeology. So anyway, there's several other sites nearby. Monument Village, you can see there, Cave Canyon Village that you see, and way down here on the Utah, New Mexico border is the site of Montezuma. And so archaeologists have poked around these sites. They have found that abajo on orange pottery at these sites. They found chocolate in the same kind of pots that Dorothy Washburn found at Alkali Ridge. And so now we're beginning to see that this area of the sophisticated pottery that has no connection to Chaco is a very wide area of chocolate making and fancy pottery making, not just Alkali Ridge, but in the environs around it, maybe 30, 40, 50 miles between one and the other. So if this was a kinship group, they diffused somehow from wherever they originally settled and making sites all across this area and making chocolate in these very sophisticated vessels. I wanted to give you a map of the distance in terms of looking at a map between Chaco, Pueblo Bonito, and Site 13, which is the big site that Dorothy Washburn found the chocolate and the fancy plates, so on, cups, pottery. And you can see that, you know, you can walk straight to it in a straight line, about 400 miles. But again, there's no connection in terms of this pottery and in terms of movement north between Chaco and Alkali Ridge. It doesn't exist. So it's as if they sprang up almost overnight from nowhere, perhaps Mesoamericans coming and settling there, or this kinship group idea. I'm sure that archaeologists later are going to come up with further ideas, but that's where we're at so far on this particular discovery. Now, I wanted to talk about another beverage that was drunk from all the way from the East Coast across the Midwest into the Mississippian culture way down south at Cahokia, Moundsville, at all of the great sites up and down the Mississippi River. They were drinking a beverage that we call the black drink. And the black drink is made from a plant called Ilex vomitoria. And you'll see as I talk about this why it's called vomitoria. And so how do the archaeologists who have found chocolate in these vessels in the Southwest know that they're not just picking up highly caffeinated Ilex vomitoria plants instead of chocolate? Well, that science has gone a long way in terms of proving the difference between one and the other. As a matter of fact, we now know 500 different markers that tell us something is chocolate and something is not chocolate. And when you've got that many markers, you know it's chocolate. Now, this black drink, this plant grows in the East. It grows through Adena and Hopewell territory in the central states and all the way up into the Mississippian folks. So it's grown pretty extensively across half of the country. And it's loaded with caffeine. And so before battle, they had warriors drinking massive doses of this highly caffeinated Ilex vomitoria. And it created a lot of sweating, and they believed that was good because you're letting out the evil spirits, you're letting out bad things from your body. And then they would vomit. And they saw vomiting as a purification ritual. Sweating out the bad stuff, vomiting up the bad stuff is good for the warriors. And so how far back does this Ilex vomitoria drink, this black drink, go? All the way back to late archaic times. So we're talking about maybe 5,000 BC or so. They started, archaic peoples, hunters and gatherers, gathering this plant and drinking. And then one of the two great cultures over there in Ohio and nearby, the Adena and Hopewell, they were also making this black drink. And the Hopewell, the first to make it, the Hopewell, as you can see from the photo bottom left, their dates are from 100 BCE to 500 CE. So they have a 600-year span of great sites, of great architecture, of great astronomy, all kinds of things going on in the Adena Hopewell sites over in the central area of the United States. And they drink their Ilex vomitoria from these shell cups. So as you can see, they put shells together to make the cups. And then we found inside these cups, not chocolate, but the Ilex vomitoria liquid. And then you can see bottom right, the cups that we have found from Cahokia and from the Mississippian sites, Moundsville, and all the others further to the south, had the same kind of beaker with Mississippian iconography on these beakers. And so they shared in this design element for black drink. They shared in the motifs on these cups for the black drink. And as you can see, they even made a handle and a little spout to pour the liquid down their throat. And the motifs on these cups, they represent water and the underworld. You remember that the cylindrical vessels in the Southwest, there were storm signs, there were rain signs. So again, here with this black drink vessel, water and the underworld. Because remember, they're going into battle, they're purifying themselves by sweating, purifying themselves by vomiting, and so on. And so they're getting prepared for either the next life or victory in battle. So they found this black drink also has theobromine, which is the main constituents for chocolate beverage, but it also contains ursolic acid, which is specific to the Ilex vomitoria plant, so that separates it from chocolate. And remember, they now have 500 markers for what is chocolate and what is not. So these were not chocolate vessels. And so we can see that around 100 AD or so, already a substantial trade network starts from the southeast all the way up to the Medina and Hopewell areas and over to Mississippian culture. And they also traded shark's teeth for necklaces, for good luck charms, for things of that nature, and whelk shells that you could decorate or use them for other purposes. Now, this is a map of how far chocolate spread over thousands of years. So down here, we're looking at Santa Ana, La Florida, which we're going to be talking about in a minute, way down in Ecuador. Then we're looking at that Olmec colony, Paso de la Amada, on the coast there. And then we're looking at San Lorenzo in the middle of the Olmec heartland. Puerto Escondido right there. So that's a map of the spread of chocolate all the way, as you're going to learn in just a second, from deepest Ecuador all the way up into eventually the ancient Southwest, which is a lot more than 2,000 miles. Now, this is a recent discovery. Again, a lot of this stuff is very recent. We're beginning to find more and more about chocolate and the chocolate trade. But we know that in Ecuador, a people's called Mayo Chimpe were drinking chocolate 5,000 years ago. And so we're talking 3000 BC in Ecuador. We're talking 1900 BC at San Lorenzo. We're talking maybe 800 BC in the Maya realm. And then we're talking 7th and 9th century AD in the Southwest. So that's a long span of time. And the site at which they discovered that the ancient Ecuadorians were making chocolate, Santa Florida, it'll come to me, Florida. And that's the name of the site. And they found at this site theobromine in 25 ceramic vessels and 21 stone artifacts. And again, 500 markers for chocolate. It's been tested extensively. It is chocolate. And they looked at the pottery fragments which held the chocolate liquid. And they found mitochondrial DNA in those pottery fragments, genetic material from within the cells that could only be from chocolate. And just like they're doing all across the chocolate drinking world, they're grounding up the beans, pouring water into them, pouring sweetening agents into them to make the chocolate for feasts, for ritual behavior. And perhaps because this site looks so large in terms of a chocolate presence, that this is where the chocolate craze was sparked. That at this place and at this time in Ecuador, the trade for chocolate began to explode, eventually making its way all the way up to Utah. And these guys are on the Pacific coast and they had trade ties with folks all along the Pacific coast. And so they could have easily canoed past a lot of areas and gone further north to make enough in terms of what they had as cocoa beans in return for what they wanted as trade. And then you can see at the bottom right photo, the very fancy chocolate vessels, very Andean looking chocolate vessels that the chocolate was put in at the site of La Floridita, at Santa Ana, La Florida. And so again, just like those cylindrical vessels that you saw from before in this lecture, the chocolate was held in these very ornate, very important looking, very religious looking, very ritual looking vessels. And that brings me to the end of my lecture. And so I wish I could go on, but I think I spent enough time. There you have it. So, anybody have any questions or feedback?
Mike, we got a few comments in the chat. I don't know if you see those.
Let's see. I'm looking for them.
So
Right, they're further down, yeah.
yeah, so Marilyn is saying that Patricia Crown, not Crow.
That's what I thought I was saying. Remember, I just had dental implants today, so I can't talk out of the right side of my mouth. Yes, I know.
No worries. And yeah, is the archaeologist notable for finding the chocolate jars at Pueblo Bonito? She is alive and giving talks on what she found there.
Now, here's what I was looking at the other day as I was researching this. I saw a, what do you call it when somebody dies? What word am I looking for? Anyway, it says she died in 2015. So I don't know if that's Patricia.
No.
She's not dead?
No.
Yeah, she's still very much
Very
alive.
good.
Right.
Okay, that's great. That's great. All right, stacks of 4 triangles. Do you have any suggested interpretation of that image? I don't. I know that these 4 triangles show up in Mesoamerican iconography. I should have looked up that iconography before I made this lecture, but no, I don't have an idea of what those 4 stacks of triangles are. Sorry. Do we know what evidence was used to determine that the vessels were not traded with the result in situ makers? Well, the pottery is made from the same kind of dirt, same kind of clay that you find right at that site. And so it probably wouldn't have looked exactly the same, had the same consistency if it was traded, the vessels were traded from further away. So I think that they're probably made at the site by the Chicolate people.
Hey, Mike, I'm glad that you mentioned the canoe trade coming up the Pacific coast. I've also, a few years ago, did a program about the early trade, the early cacao and jade trade routes. And it looks as if cacao first came up from the Amazon, probably by canoe, and first came ashore in Mesoamerica and Honduras. Then there was not only the canoe trade that went around the Yucatan up to the Olmec area, but it came across through the volcanic area over to the coast of El Salvador. And not only from Ecuador were long time established canoe trade routes up to the Soconusco, and even to get to the Olmec from the Pacific side. But what I was thinking was that you were pondering of why the site in southeastern Utah might have received the cacao earlier than Chaco, is because if you look at the river patterns that you show in your couple maps, Chaco was more over by the Rio Grande, and perhaps they came from the Pacific coast up and connected with the Colorado River, and we're using the Colorado River to not have to use a land route, and then we're able to get much easier up to that site that you mentioned. They might have not have been aware of at all that Chaco was way over there if they were always heading kind of north.
That's a good thought. But again, it would mean that people from way far south from America, they had been making that canoe travel all the way up to Utah. And that's amazing in itself.
What is the homeland of these Mayo Chinchipe people?
It's northeastern Ecuador.
Okay.
And someone asked if the pods were being used for money or just the seeds. Just the seeds. I don't think the pods lasted long after they broke them open. They would probably disintegrated, went bad. Any other questions? So, okay, Angeline Duran.
I have a question. Yeah, you guys were just talking about the river travel and the possibility of South Americans going all the way up into the upper Southwest. And I don't know. I mean, this is a completely weird question, but it kind of unrelated to the topic, but related to that. Has anybody ever heard anything about the Ute having any connections down in Peru? It's sort of just a little thread of an idea I've been following, and since some people here seem to have some knowledge of that kind of length of travel, I wondered if, someone has some idea.
The Ute? Did you say the Ute?
The Ute, yeah.
No, that's way up into historical times.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, no, I'm trying to say the people in the eastern Great Basin, the Numic speakers is what I'm trying to say, the Numic speakers.
Could have been a conduit for this trade.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anybody has ever heard any thought about there being some link between that far north and that far south.
I haven't seen that. But then again, I kept my research to pre-Columbian cultures and not historical cultures, so it could be there. We'll have to take a look for that. Al Dart has had his hand up. I'm sorry, Al, I didn't see that hand.
I could comment on that. Garth Norman here. I'm a Utah archaeologist, Mesoamerican archaeologist, and have done a lot of public archaeology exploration work throughout Utah and neighboring areas, and found striking correspondences in different areas with the petroglyphs. For instance, in the Green River vernal area, there are petroglyphs that for me were clearly relating to the southwest, and at this particular time, some years ago, as has already been discussed, the Mesoamerican connection with the southwest was pretty well established as a long distance trade communication route. Well, I had a lot of backlash as I began to make these comparisons with my Utah Fremont colleagues who were kind of protective of their territory and not wanting to consider those long distance communication routes. But that has changed considerably through the linguistic, Numic, Indian languages, as you've already mentioned, Angelina. And yes, I think there's a very positive accumulating evidences at this point. I've completed a major archaeological contract at the Barrow Gap archaeological site in southwestern Utah, and saw abundant evidence for a connection with the turquoise trade open pit mines in Nevada. And the orientations are established through prominent landmarks for these long distance trade communications. For instance, some 20 to 30 miles west of the Barrow Gap, there are huge rock cairns with finger arms going out that connect back through the Barrow Gap on astronomical orientations, but connecting with other long distance trade routes with those turquoise open pit mines in Nevada. So the speculation was, if it's those long distance trades are going out to the west, I was able to establish those connections with, again, similar petroglyph sites through Nevada all the way to California.
May I
And
maybe get your email sometime during the session, and we can chat more about this, at length?
you bet. Just
Thank
one other brief comment then I'll add here is that the speculation then was focusing on the long distance trade communication route all the way to Chaco Canyon by looking the other direction. Navajo Mountain near Alkali Ridge is the major landmark there in the southwest as a possible related route carrying beyond Chaco or beyond Alkali Ridge on across to Utah and the Fairland Gap, as well as Jim's already mentioned, pretty abundant evidence of the trade route also going down the Pacific coast, as well as through the overland area from the southwest and central Mexico.
That's fascinating information.
On to South America is long distance communication is really on the radar today
Thanks,
for
Norm.
consideration.
Al Dart had his hand up.
Pardon me?
Al,
Yeah, before I do, Barb McLeod had a question in the chat that has some bearing on what I'd like to comment on. So could you address hers first, please?
I'm sorry, the question was from who?
Barb McLeod about the Utah Aztecan languages.
Oh, has anyone considered the distribution of Utah Aztecan languages in Mesoamerica in the 8th century with regard to the kin groups hypothesis for Utah connections?
someone asked about what those SALF was about. The photos, the pictures of the folks attending the lecture covered up the Santa Ana, La Florida site name. And so that's what it's called in Ecuador, Santa Ana, La Florida. Al?
Okay, Barb McLeod asked in the chat if anybody has considered the distribution of Utah Aztecan languages in Mesoamerica in the 8th century with regard to the kin groups hypothesis for the Utah connection. Do you have any comment on that? Because I have a comment that would follow that.
I don't, but I think that's a very interesting, line of study. I don't know if anybody's done that, but they should.
Yeah, well, my comments are somewhat related to that. I appreciate the fact that you mentioned that there may have been kin groups involved all along the routes between the Southwest and Mesoamerica that were involved in this distribution of cacao, chocolate, into the Southwest. For many years, there were a lot of archaeologists thought there was direct trading from way far south, several thousand miles south in Mesoamerica, all the way to the Southwest. And in my view, as an archaeologist, that seems rather impractical if you're trying to transport something all the way, across that distance. There are so many groups in between that you could, trade or sell those commodities to, that it doesn't really make much sense to me that people would, wait until they got all the way to the Southwest to distribute those materials. So I think an alternative to that is, your idea about the kin groups sharing and distributing and perhaps passing it along from one group to another, rather than, single persons going that long distance from Mesoamerica up into the Southwest. The other thing I appreciate about your lecture, talking about the lack of data for chocolate between Alkali Ridge and Chaco. You said that this is the state of our knowledge today. And I think that's very important because you also mentioned that there are now 4 other sites southeast of Alkali Ridge where these cacao evidence has been found. And there are a lot of sites that have been excavated in between Chaco and Alkali Ridge that still have the material in collections that has not been analyzed, to see whether there's cacao on any of these other plots from these other sites. And there's also a lot of sites in that area that have not been excavated that might have evidence to that idea. So I think it's important to realize that this is the state of our knowledge today and that it is subject to change.
I think
Archaeology moves so slowly that it's very frustrating sometimes, because we might see studies of those places 20 years from now. That's how slow it goes. Because people have to get grants, they have to have a team, they have to stay there for a while, so it's not easy.
I
Right,
think,
and it also takes money, even for graduate students to try to do research in museums.
right?
I think, Garth Norman here, I think we're overlooking one important linguistic connection with Utoaztecan in the Southwest into Mesoamerica. Brian Stubbs has dedicated his life's research in the Utoaztecan and clearly has connections, showing these connections between the Southwest relating to Mesoamerica. The Aztec migration, for instance, Utoaztecan, all of these Southwest tribes are part of the Utoaztecan linguistic stock and are part of that major trade route. His lifelong study has cataloged approximately 30% linguistic documentation of this relationship. So I would encourage looking his work up. Brian Stubbs, linguist. He's at the College of Southeastern Utah at Blanding.
So remember that Dorothy Washburn and Patricia Crown both had some things to say about the sudden advent of these kinds of ceramics with chocolate. Remember Dorothy Washburn looking at this abajo on orange, thin, sophisticated ware, suddenly turning up at Alkali Ridge. She believes that that couldn't happen by way of slowly introducing these new styles from one group to the other, that it looks like it almost happened overnight. So that's something to keep in mind. Patricia Crown also said that the cylindrical vessels at Chaco are very different in this way. There were no vessels like this before chocolate at Chaco, no style like this before, and no style after it stopped. And so right in the middle, suddenly a new kind of pottery, suddenly a new kind of design, suddenly a new use for this new kind of pottery. So Dorothy Washburn and Patricia Crown are actually arguing against a slow evolution between kinship groups, and they're almost saying that this happened rapidly by a group of people that came to these sites almost overnight and introduced these styles. That's what they think.
One thing is, I've a decade or so ago been around a spiritual elder, Taclaelel, of the, I don't know, the Aztec Teotihuacan lineage, but he did a presentation where he was talking about the migrations of the tribes that went in the 4 directions. And his theory was he had seen petroglyphs in the US Southwest that made him think the group that went north must have passed through here. And his idea was that they went as far all the way up along the Canadian American border, and then came down the Mississippi Valley, and that they started going down the Florida Peninsula, and that Ocala, Florida, up in North Central Florida,
on Mesoamerica.
was very much like a loan word for a, not a graveyard, but a memorial place. And so they might have got that far south. And then they were the tribe that came all the way back down to Mexico and saw the eagle on the cactus and whatever. But it's interesting that Azteca connection, it might have been an earlier than the migrations, so that the North group knew where to migrate along because of this already established route. But I would think it would show up in not just loan words among languages, but in genetics.
Right. And genetic studies are one of the slowest of all of the archaeological studies. We have to wait forever for those. They had all those bones at Cahokia and teeth at Cahokia for decades. And no one ever tried to do a DNA study of the teeth and bones until just very recently, even though they had them in their hands. So it's just it's a fascinating but slow.
It's a better map then.
It looks like you have another question in the chat.
It was about the San Lorenzo dates. Is that the one you're talking about? Anyway, whoever wrote about the dates for San Lorenzo, the dates have been pushed back for San Lorenzo all the way back to 1800 BC. So it's a lot earlier than those dates that we were used to before. And the source of the cocoa use in Santa Ana, La Florida, the researchers who were doing this said it came, straight from, well, this site is in the Amazon. So there's cocoa pods all over the Amazon. So can they narrow it down to one place in the Amazon? I'm not so sure that that's going to be possible. Anyone else?
Yes. Hello? Hello? Yes. The possibility of connection between Ecuador, northern Ecuador, and the Southwest was explored by Patricia Annawalt, I think in 1991. She published on clothing similarities between West Mexico and Manabí province in Ecuador, and also talked about extending this. This is basically postulating a seaborne trade all the way up to the mouth of the Colorado in connection to the Zuni up there. It's an important paper with a lot of important stuff in it that should be read. Also, Dorothy Hostler, ex-Monis, and their relatives, another Ecuador and North connection, fairly well proven, very well proven. But the node in the middle is West Mexico. The connection would be like not walking, a sack of cocoa 2,000 miles, but paddling and pulling the thing up the coast. The West Mexico connection, I don't consider to be a Mesoamerican connection. West Mexican culture, to me, is not Mesoamerican. I work in the Maya lowlands, but I would really go back, look at that stuff and kind of think maybe they went that way, in the same way that we went from the Beringia bridge to down the line coastal spread from Asia. I would like to think of connections going north, largely out of northern Ecuador, all the way to the US Southwest.
West Mexico is a fascinating culture, and whether you can tie it to Mesoamerica, that's a good question. There's enough elements there that there's obviously in their figurines and their village figurines, that there are connections to wide religious ideas. So I don't know, because it's very different, no doubt about it. And it's the least studied of all of the civilizations and cultures in Mesoamerica for sure. So we need to find out a lot more about those folks. Did this earlier paper mention chocolate? There's two papers you mentioned.
Yeah.
Did they mention
No,
chocolate?
the more important one I would say is, it was Latin American Antiquity 1991, I think. And I think it was titled Clothing Similarities between West Mexico and Ecuador.
Yeah, I saw that study.
That did not touch chocolate at all. It touched in many, many other things that were really solid connections that went West Mexico to Ecuador, skipping most of what was in between. And
Oh yeah, I think so too.
how's that?
I think so too. I agree with you.
And that suggests a sea trade, and there's a whole lot of other stuff published on that. And her One thing she mentioned was besides the clothing set, that is the set of clothing of northern Ecuador and the Andean region there, is the clothing of West Mexico, and it has nothing to do whatsoever with Mesoamerica. There are many other things, but language-wise, she mentioned that Greenberg had thought that the Zunian might be part of Macro-Quechuan. But the language group, I don't know, I'm not a linguist, but I can definitely recognize the clothing pattern and a whole lot of other stuff as directly exported out.
And the most important connection between Ecuador and West Mexico, I'm trying, in my mind, I can't remember the name of the orange sea shell.
Oh yeah, Spondylus princeps. Yeah, I've done a lot of work on that, and I believe that was the key to all of it. Really, that's the trade item that was
Exactly
valuable.
And there's a lot of that orange stuff, a lot traded between Ecuador and West Mexico. It was a major trade item.
It was available from northern Ecuador, the very northernmost part. It's a deep water show, by the way, all the way to the very southern tip of Baja California. And so if you wanted to go get it, you basically went up, got it, dove 100, 200 feet underwater, brought it up, and then brought it back to South America. I think they probably traded textiles going north and perishables, although there are some actual items that are unmistakable.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on that trade.
A little bit, yeah. That can be tested, by the way. You can take Spondylus probably and do accelerator mass spectrometry or something to locate the seabed off a river mouth where the Spondylus was created, and then match that to the archaeological record, because we know a lot of places it came from, but you can follow the trade if you just do that little bit of work. And then you can tell what's going north and what's coming south and what's going over to Teotihuacan, which also figures into this.
And it's still being used today. If you go to the Gem and Jewelry Show in Rosemont, they sell a lot of Spondylus shell rings and bracelets and necklaces. I can't remember what they call Spondylus shell in America. It's a different name, but it's the Spondylus shell. So it's still in use and still in use as jewelry.
Oh yeah, that's important stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I think we should wrap it up. It's now 8:19 Central Time, so we've been here a while. So remember that we're going to have another great Islander lecture on September 16th with Barb McLeod. And what's the title of her lecture, Jim?
Plus, it's
A
right
cave
here.
for all seasons.
Yes, she's got her hand up. A cave for all seasons, agriculture and New Year's rituals at La Tunich Cave, Petén, Guatemala. Did you have more comments, Barb?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
We just want to know the name of your.
I was saying the title of your program, but I see you have your hand up. So do you want to make more comment?
No, I had my hand up on the West Mexico Ecuador connection, which I can't claim to know a lot about, but I did read that article by Patricia Annewalt years ago. And the specific connection was between the Tarascan or Purepecha costume and colonial period coins from Ecuador. It was not a living group in Ecuador. And so there was no way to verify the language spoken by those people in Ecuador because they were already long gone. And but because Purepecha is a linguistic isolate, it's not connected to any other language in Mesoamerica. This seems to me to be kind of the smoking gun that they came up from Ecuador, or at least that's what the indication would be, together with shaft tombs and gold from Ecuador found in shaft tombs and so on. So that paper by Patricia Annewalt, I just want to agree that it's extremely important about reconstructing that trade route.
So, all right, Islander magazine for the Americas has got how many lectures? We have got 5 or 6 lectures coming up already, month by month. We have 5 or 6 lectures coming up on the Islander venue so far, don't we? A lot of lectures and a lot of reports. In a couple of days, Jim is going to publish Islander magazine #2. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. So I send that out to everybody. So you should be able to get the Islander magazine in your mail for free. Always will be free. Hope you read the last issue, #1. It was a great issue. All right, I had my implants put in. I'm starting to get drowsy now with those implants. So I'm gonna have to call a halt to. It was really great. The questions and answers were great. The give and take were great. A lot of stuff that was revealed here. I hope you liked the lecture. I hope it came together. If you have a chance, give me some feedback so I know what I'm doing right and I know what I'm doing wrong, and I can take critical feedback. It's okay to me. If
It was excellent, Mike, and I love the new graphics. It really
Thank
nice.
Thank you. All right. See you next month, September 16th. Look for your Islander magazine in your email. If you do not have the Islander magazine coming to you within a week or so, send me an email or send Jim Reed an email and we will get it to you.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Take care.
I'm glad you were.
Sign up.
You know how to sign up?